Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Society Sustainability Squad podcast series. My name is Abdul Rahim, and I'm proud to be your host for this series. Hosted out of the UAE, the podcast was designed to help bring members together to drive change around ESG for the industry. We also want to put the Marketing Society at the heart of the sustainability dialogue and lead the conversation for the industry.
Welcome to the Marketing Society Sustainability Squad podcast, leading the conversation on ESG.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Society Sustainability Squad podcast series. Today, I'm incredibly pleased to be joined by Tricia Weener. I've had the pleasure of working with Trish for a period of time, and we shall be exploring driving positive change and planning for the long-term sustainability business growth. Trish is a global CMO and communications officer, a sustainability leader, mentor, and coach. Trish is also a fellow and global ambassador of the Marketing Society, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and a fellow of the Marketing Academy. After spending several years running her own agency and almost a decade with HSBC, Trish, to use a pun, elevated her career with Kony.
That's bad.
and now is a fractional CMO for Global Cap and a board member for Ecoth, a climate fintech. Trish, welcome, and thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you. Quite the introduction. There's too many fellows there, I think. No, it's really lovely to be here.
Fresh from Cannes, where creativity drives progress. How was your experience, and any insights for today's theme, driving positive change?
Yes, I mean, I've actually I was trying to work out how long I've been going to Cannes Lion. It's something when I was on the agency side, I didn't do, but I think probably 8 to 10 years ago, realised that with all of the technology change in the industry, it was actually a really good way of developing your knowledge around what was going on, the new, technologies, changes in data, obviously this year AI. But this year, I was really pleased to see a huge amount of content and conversation around sustainability. There were probably 3 highlights for me. There were a lot of highlights, but specifically in the sort of space of positive change. The first was I joined a session at Gold's House on the Monday of Cannes. And actually an ex-colleague of ours, so Hayley, who now is CMO of Seagrass, was hosting it jointly with a number of other companies. Probably my one takeout from that session was around the fact that actually businesses and brands that get themselves into the right place through positive change, i.e. are more sustainable, need to start to take share from businesses that are not, or brands that are not. And I really liked that concept of actually there's a competitive advantage, and we talk about this a lot within the ESG business. It's sustainability can be more reporting led and regulatory and governance, but actually there's a big value creation bit. So there was a lot of discussion around how you create value through being a sustainable business, which ultimately will then drive long-term growth. So that was probably the first highlight. The second was I did a fantastic session with McKinsey and the Marketing Academy on the Thursday morning, which was around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from there was a wonderful lady that I was sitting alongside on the panel from Diageo, and she talked about how important it is, particularly as marketers, to show up before you show off. So whether it is in relation to environmental sustainability or it is DEI, you have to get your own house in order first. So those are probably a couple of highlights. The other thing that was great was AdNet Zero launched their new sustainability media framework last week. So if people haven't seen that, it's a global framework around Ad Zero to help organizations understand their media impact. So worth taking a look at.
I want to start by also tapping into your vast career, which spans sectors, agency, and on client side. How would you say your experience has shaped your philosophy as a marketing leader?
Well, firstly, it's a very long career these days, which is getting a bit depressing. I think for me, the thing that I have probably continued to recognize in any marketing leader and obviously coach around, a mentor around, is the need to remain ever curious. And this point around continuous development, our industry has changed so much in this time, and more probably than ever in the last sort of 5 to 7 years. And it's about to go through another huge change with AI. I don't know whether you saw the Dove ad recently, but their claim is that 95% of their content will be AI generated by 2025. That's next year. And in terms of the implications of that and the consequence of that, I think it's huge. So for me, in terms of my philosophy, is you can never sit still. If you want to remain relevant in our industry, then you have to remain ever curious and constantly develop and evolve. I think through my career, the other thing is the importance of cultural relevance, particularly to take a customer-centric lens. You really need to be able to understand the sort of cultural difference of the markets that you're operating in, but also the implications of that from your brand or business or product. And that's something that I've been very privileged, having lived in a number of different countries. I think it's really helped me understand and also lead for that. Sustainability is obviously a red thread that goes throughout my career, and I've both worked with brands and selected companies that I'm going to work with who have very, very strong sustainability ethos within the organization, and have then really been able to lead for that. So that's something that, you know, I feel very proud of, but also have been able to engender and embed across organizations that I've led within. And probably the final thing is just around the people. You know, I pride myself on being a very human leader. I love, more than anything, developing and supporting others with their development. So I think interacting with and being influenced by so many people, that also helps you grow. And you really need to, the sort of ability to take understanding and learning from people who work for you as well as people that you work for is something that I really appreciate and value.
I've had the testament of working with you, and I can say I vouch for you on that one, because I think with financial services industry, it's very more, I would say, challenging in marketing compared to selling a kind of like physical product that you can innovate all the time. How you helped us to get marketing on the table, and you felt empowered going into business conversations. That's something I really took away from you. So thank you.
I'm pleased to hear that.
And you mentioned Dove. They did a really good piece, Unilever, on post-can. I'd encourage viewers to also have a look at that. It's about how marketers can stay relevant, power of emotional connection, and always showing up. Dove has always showed up for, I mean, as a kid, I had to use Dove because I had eczema. Yeah. I was encouraged by the doctor to use Dove, and they've always been a brand that's been with me since. So they've always shown up, and now they're really innovative for the future using AI. So
I'll take a look at that. I haven't seen it actually.
Really good piece.
Yeah.
Since we last met, though, you were just kicking off your tenure at Kone. Cone or Kone?
I say Connor, but if you're American, they say Kone. And if you're from Sweden, it's said even differently. It actually means machine in Finnish.
Okay.
So Connor is a Finnish headquartered company. It was set up there, now operates across 65 markets. But yeah, I say Connor. But my Finnish colleagues would probably correct me on that.
3 years later, you're now in extremely warmer climates.
That's true.
Can you tell us more about what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the term is I now have a portfolio career. That's the official term for it. Sounds very grand. So you mentioned at the beginning, I'm doing a fractional CMO role for Globacap, which is a fintech scale-up headquartered in London, but we just launched in the US, which is very exciting. So team got that over the line
live this week, right?
Yeah. Literally just launched this week. So really looking forward to seeing the growth in that market. I do a board advisory role for eCorth, which is a climate fintech. Super interesting technology that they're using basically to map climate emissions across the 4 different climate categories. And then I'm doing another board advisory role for a digital company. And I think probably most importantly, I've set up a company called the ESG Business. And what we're looking to do is help companies be better businesses. And when we use the term better, we mean that you can still create a competitive advantage and grow while not damaging the environment and taking a societal stand. So for us, I think, I was saying before, a lot of sustainability or ESG focus in larger organizations is around reporting and regulatory frameworks that drive positive change as a consequence. But actually, if you're talking particularly to mid-markets in this space, then there is a huge opportunity and a competitive advantage that can be got by getting ahead of the curve, even if you're not being regulated around it.
I guess that just answered some of what I wanted to ask, Nick, but what led you to setting this up? Did you see a massive opportunity, maybe coming to UAE, and was it working with entities here? It's a global agency and you can support across all the markets you worked in, which is probably in like 4 different regions of the world so far. So I think I've been very purposeful around sustainability I was working it out like over 20 years now. So when I ran my own agency, we did a lot of work with the Carbon Neutral Company at the time. And that was as a lot of the banks were just becoming the first to be carbon neutral. And HSBC did a huge amount of work, as you will remember, around green finance, launching green bonds, launching sustainable finance, doing a lot in the smart and sustainable city space. And then actually, Connor, I made a choice to join, in part because they were the first in their industry to have science-based targets. And that for me was a really big signal. And I was... when I joined, we were just launching the new strategy phase, which was around sustainable success with customers. And it was everything that Connor was doing was so focused around actually how it drives improvement and reduction in emissions. But also we were leading a lot for diversity and equity and inclusion within the organization. So that was, again, a very conscious choice. Move forward to now, the decision to set up was to try to influence as many companies as possible through doing, obviously, this working with other businesses and across as many sectors. Again, focusing predominantly on the sectors where we have the deepest experience, as you would expect. In terms of Dubai, here because, so huge focus of the UAE government on sustainability and ESG more broadly. It feels to me like this is how Asia felt when I moved there sort of 10 years ago. There's, incredible positive growth and change. And I love to operate in those environments. And in terms of a time zone, it's perfect to be here when you're working with the US and you're also working with Asia and Europe. So those are all of the reasons for being here. And I think, you know what, it's a really great time as UAE is starting to push for this change, to then be having conversations with companies that are recognizing the change that they then need to engender. So if I was a leader for marketing in an automotive industry, what angle could I approach the ESG business from? Are you talking more to marketeers, or you're working more with the business or with sustainability officers?
So that's a very interesting question. And right now, actually, it's really mixed. What we're tending to find is that in the mid-market business, so we identify our customer target groups as either market leaders, and I suspect the automotive company you're talking about would sit in the sort of market leader space, or disruptors. And for us, actually, it doesn't matter where that first contact comes from. But what we're finding is in the sort of disruptor space, it tends to be C-suite. So it could be chief commercial officer, it could be CEO, it could be CFO as well. And on the market leader side, I think, again, because we're bringing, I think, a very healthy balance of sustainability, practical experience with customer marketing brand growth. Actually, in that instance, it could be chief growth officer, it could be CMO, it could be chief communications officer. What we have had less where we have had less interaction, interestingly, is with chief sustainability officers at this stage.
Interesting.
So yes, and that's something that could change over time. We are a relatively new business in this space, so things always iterate when you start a new business and as you start to scale. So I would expect that to change. What we find is we will then have contact with people who are in the sustainability space. The other thing I would say is sort of sustainability transformation.
Yep.
Is the other area of organizations that we're kind of working into.
Brilliant. And do you feel like marketing as a whole needs to do more to drive that change? Do you think the responsibility rests with marketing? We had a very interesting dialogue in one of our other podcasts with Dan Dimmock about purpose-led brands and developing it that way. And that starts not just with marketing, it starts with a whole organizational shift. So do you feel the industry needs to do more from our side, or do you feel businesses need to look at everything a little bit more holistically?
I think businesses have to look at this holistically. And I think for me, and you mentioned it earlier around the importance of marketing being on the executive board. Yeah. So as a leader, C-suite leader in that executive board, it's incumbent on marketing to be part of that conversation and to be leading for the change. But I don't think it can't only be the responsibility. I think what I would say is that marketing leaders need to educate themselves and understand the role that they can then play in that discussion and in that progressive change. Because it does, you do need to understand there are risks and there are huge opportunities from getting this right. But if you get it wrong, the implications can actually reflect very negatively from a reputational perspective, which naturally would fall with the CMO who's responsible for marketing and comms. So, you need to go into it eyes wide open, and you need to be able to advise the organization, coming back to this point around show up first before you show off. Unless you have got your house in order, it's impossible to then actually think about how you engage externally with customers. So getting all of that done first is something that the organization needs to do holistically. And to your point, to be purpose-led, to actually set science-based targets at the highest level of an organization and have it embedded in strategy. And importantly, as part of the decision-making within the organization, that's what we talk about. It's fundamental business model change that is needed to actually get us to the point where a lot of organizations are going to achieve their net zero targets. If you're working around the periphery, doing tactical things, you're making some progress, but you're not going to drive positive change fully and consistently and ensure that actually you hit the targets that you've set for 2030, 2050.
I think this point is really good in the sense that I think it's the balance of marketing influencing strategy and then finding the purpose for the business or navigating a business towards their, purpose, and then showing or demonstrating how the brand can have a bigger impact. And then that can help quantify on the table the impact marketing can have. And then the tactical stuff comes in. I think most of us get too focused on tactical. We have to do something, copy is coming, this is coming, be at this event, and then it all falls apart a little bit. It's a balance between greenwashing and green hushing. And I think we need to find that. We'll come to this later actually, which is shouldn't be shy about saying what we're doing, but show up, as you say.
And I'm actually really concerned about green hushing. There was I may not get the data point exactly right, but I think as of today, only 25% of CEOs are now still talking about sustainability in their quarterly updates and annual reports. And that's really shocking. And that's a significant change in the last 2 years. And for me, it's really sad that CEOs, corporations are more worried about actually externally communicating what they're doing. So I hope that changes again, because a lot of this is very good. There's a lot that isn't. That's why the regulations in Europe are coming in, right? You also can't mislead consumers and you can't misrepresent. And that's the balance that's got to be found, as you rightly say.
Canada just interestingly announced that they've amended the Competition Act to address greenwashing, imposing strict requirements on substantiating environmental claims. Moving the conversation a bit forward, both HSBC and Connor, have a over 100-year heritages. Can you tell us when sustainability became paramount in both these sectors and part and parcel of what marketing was doing?
So HSBC was the first bank to get carbon neutral status back in 2005. And that was under John Bond all those years ago. They were a real leader in sustainability. There were things that were very different then, because there was a lot of criticism in the market that it's great to say you're carbon neutral, but you're offsetting huge amounts of your carbon emissions. So, that's not necessarily what would be looked on favorably today, but they really were a leader in sustainability right from the very get-go, and sustainability in its widest definition. So taking into account actually having a very strong inclusive culture, making sure that they were representing across all of the different groups within the organization. Mm-hmm. I think Connor equally was the leader in its industry in being the first to set science-based targets. So both of those companies had sustainability at their very core, and under Noel Quinn's leadership at HSBC, I would suggest that they've doubled down even more with the net zero targets that are now in place, and a huge focus within the organisation to actually support clients. Scope 3, as we know, is 80%, generally around 80% of a company's emissions. Yep. And if that's the case, then you really, in banking, need to make sure that you're supporting customers through that transition. Otherwise, you won't achieve your Scope 3 targets. As we were saying before, for me, it's really important, whichever organisation or brand I work for, it needs to be embedded in the strategy and in decision making. And I made those choices because of that. Yeah. And I think it's really exciting to see the progress that both businesses have made and are making. Most recently with Connor, they announced that all of their factories are now carbon neutral, wow, which was a really great addition after. I left in July last year, and I was really excited to see that come through. There was a big shift in Connor. Obviously, it's 60,000 people, elevator and escalator company, move 1 billion people every day. A huge part of the offering is maintenance. Yep. So, making sure that elevators and escalators are still working for all of us to use. Yep. And so there's a big fleet. So one of the first ways in terms of affecting the operational side was to actually change all of the car fleet, the vehicle fleet, to EV. Yep. And again, we're a very long way along that process. So, I am a CMO, but as you can probably hear, it was a much more holistic view, and sitting on the sustainability board as I did, actually the influence that we could have as executive board members, we had really looked at the most material things, and we were working through it. And of course, then the comms organization helped by telling proud stories and making sure that we were engaging the whole organization around this change.
And that leads me perfectly into my next question, which is, across your amazingly vast career across sectors, what was the most significant ESG campaign or project, I would say, because it's not necessarily a campaign, that you've worked on? And if you could talk us through it. So
there are a number. I think probably the one which we developed right at the end of my time at HSBC was that I think galvanizing for the organization. So the business had already done a huge amount, as I was mentioning before, around actually making sure that there were a very large number of products available for customers in this space. So whether it was sustainable finance, green bonds, access to very good research in terms of information for clients and thought leadership for clients in the space. And so what we wanted to do was really bring that all together. And we did that under a campaign title of Business Plan for the Planet. And really just supported our clients to another level. And this was on the B2B side. So it was everything from business banking clients right the way through up to large corporates. And their needs were very different. So basically just looking at how we could package up our offering
Yeah.
and tailor it for the different segments that we supported. There was quite a big educational piece as well within it to make sure that our RMs had everything that they needed. We did quite a lot of thought leadership pieces with different media partners. So that's probably one of.
So in financial services, you're looking at a spectrum of businesses with different needs, different audiences. How do you balance the different clients and audiences' requirements and needs when it comes to sustainability?
So I think it's like any good piece of segmentation. You have to really clearly identify the customers and build your propositions around those segments. And I think, if I take ESG business as an example, where we've started is to say, actually, well, we have sector experience in these areas.
Yeah.
So naturally, we could work across any sector, but we're going to provide more value to our clients in those specific sectors that we have experience. We then look at actually the types of services that we can offer, and again, align that around the needs. And so if you take market leaders, they're much further along their transition. As we were saying, HSBC started back in the early 2000s. That's actually commonplace in Europe and the US, but actually in the Middle East, in some instances, some of these very large businesses who haven't been regulated are a much earlier phase in their transition. And it's really exciting for me to see quite a lot of the big financial services companies here, clearly now focusing on their sustainability, both their positioning, but also the actions that they're taking. I think you've got to understand the reality of the customer and where they're at. I mean, it's the same with consumers, right?
Yeah.
It's basic and good targeting, and then building propositions that are going to be highly relevant. And then actually it makes the sell a lot easier.
Yeah. It's funny because throughout the podcast, we've talked a lot about marketing theory. We talked about funnel. We talked about segmentation, positioning. It keeps it true that we have a really strong backing in our theory, and now it's up to us to navigate the change that's coming. It's quite interesting. In contrast, we have the elevator industry, where the offering may be a bit more clear, but the wider impact of the organization may needed to be refined or defined further. So how do you work it in a sector like that when it comes to sustainability and driving positive change?
Well, again, I think in an industrial organization, you have to start with understanding what are the most material impacts. Because if you're a very large organization, what you can't have is hundreds of different initiatives going on that are actually not focused and prioritized. You don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the funding to do it. So actually, first and foremost, any organization needs to understand where its biggest and most material impacts are, and then prioritize actions against that, and make sure that you have the right people within the leadership team leading from the top around that. It has to be, I said it before, it has to be embedded in the strategy of the organization. It has to be a fundamental part of decision making, which means that the executive leadership team need to be fully on board. They need to be educated, and they then need to help embed it across their organizations. So it is something that when you embark on it, you can't do it lightly, or, well, I suppose you can, but my strong recommendation and what I would guide any client around is, if you're going to do it properly, then actually you need to do it in that way, and it needs to be a top-down approach. And the ability to kind of tell proud stories and continue to engage the organization around that change as you go is really important. Maybe just to answer that question specifically in relation to Connor, though, one of the things that I was very involved in and really enjoyed was actually how we started to evolve our propositions. So most people probably don't realize that elevators are very smart machines. So in the invent of Internet of Things, the ability to actually connect an elevator, and within our India tech organization, we had a huge data center, and I went there. I was fortunate to go there on one occasion and saw these enormous screens that were basically just watching the different elevators that we have all across the world, how they're working. It was called predictive maintenance, and essentially it was a 24/7 offering that, because of the technology and the intelligence that we had, we could identify when an elevator may stop working, an elevator or escalator may stop working. And we could therefore stop the pain point for the customer because we could solve it in advance, often from a distance. So we didn't actually have to send a maintenance crew in if the elevator itself could self-identify the fault that was coming.
Amazing.
And so that then had a positive impact on reducing environmental impact, because we didn't have to send the maintenance technician in a car to the location. So actually technology and innovation had a huge part to play in how we were able to reduce our environmental impact, but also, and importantly, deliver a better customer experience. Because actually downtime of elevators, if you can imagine, if you live in a block, many of us do here, is really painful. So understanding then as a marketer and as a comms specialist, how you could then communicate that 24/7 predictive services. So, those are the sorts of things that I think often, particularly if you're not in an industry, you don't necessarily understand the potential or opportunity. And that did lead us to build out a completely new proposition around that offering.
And this is a great example of using technology to help enable or define a product offering, making positive customer impact, driving positive change, but also in a sustainable way as well. So fantastic. There's one other thing I have to ask, which is you spent a lot of time in the East, a lot of time in the West, and now in the Middle East. How do you balance the regional dynamics when it comes to sustainability or even marketing? Because so many regions have the different nuances. How do you pick that up so quickly and start to drive positive change? What are the kind of techniques, tools, or quick wins that you may have seen?
So I think whenever you move to a new geography or you need to understand, I mean, it could be a company or a consumer deeply, then you need to take the time to do it. There are techniques that you can use. I think you have to actively listen and read a lot and make sure that you've got a very thorough understanding of the market dynamics and also any of the sort of customer consumer trends within those countries. I'd say it's not easy, but you can do it relatively quickly. In very large organizations, both HSBC as an example and Connor, we were very fortunate to have access to global economists, to have global data, and actually that in itself, when you then started to look specifically at a region, was incredibly helpful. Obviously doing it now here, I guess independently in some respects, it's just about making sure that you are well connected. And that's maybe another thing from you asked that question right at the beginning around sort of being a marketing leader and what are the things that have influenced me along the way. And probably one thing I didn't mention, which is highly relevant here, is your connections. So actually having an incredible network and being able to call on that network at points in time when, you really need either support or you need input, that's something that I've really valued and been very fortunate to have. I've worked hard to create it, but been very fortunate to have here in the region. And it was the same actually when I moved to Asia and same across Europe.
We're the best network here, the Marketing Society.
Oh, 100%. Actually, to be fair, and I said this to Alistair the other night, when he said, anywhere in the world, that obviously I was very privileged to be part of the launch of the society in Hong Kong and to see the growth here when I was coming to Dubai and UAE, I was really excited to actually become part of this society because the growth that Marketing Society, Alistair, and the wider community here that have achieved is really impressive. And
the dynamics between the members and how we meet each other, not just part of the events and stuff that happen through the society, outside of it.
Yeah.
Then you know people.
It's like nothing that I've experienced before when I've moved to another country, and I think it's been a really big part of what has made that sort of, I guess, journey into Dubai a lot easier. It was a kind of ready-made network. And I really appreciate all of the people that I've, some I knew already, but a lot of people I've now met and really made me feel very, very welcome and have also offered support and been really encouraging in terms of what I'm doing. So, yeah.
If you're not a member, become a member.
Yeah, too right.
For all guests, we want to leave by asking your top 3 practical advices for marketeers to make a difference, be it professionally or personally?
So these are relatively easy for me because it generally forms part of my first discussion with any marketing team that I'm leading or from an organizational perspective. But it's stay curious, be creative, and understand commerciality. Like, those are the 3 things. And I maybe just unpack it a little bit. We talked originally about the sort of curiosity piece. I think from a marketing perspective, that's really important. But as a human being as well, staying curious and, being curious for your children, I think is a really good thing, and role modeling that for them in the same way as you should role model it within, the organizations that you work in. It takes time and you have to make space for it, but it's so important. The second thing about being creative, I think when I talk about that and you're talking within a sort of marketing and comms context, the natural place that people go is creativity in marketing. It's not what I mean. It's about creativity in how you problem solve. It's about creativity in terms of how you think about different things. It's creativity in the mindset. It's being open. And that for me is something that marketers bring to the leadership table, which is quite unique. We do think in a different way. And so making sure that you surface that and you do it in a way that is comfortable and authentic for you, but also brings value to the organization, is something that, again, I've always sort of talked about and also led for. And the final piece around commerciality, this is where sometimes in marketing we don't get it right. And it's something that I have always held very dear to any marketing organization that I have worked in or led, is you need to understand the business, you need to understand the profitable growth drivers, and you need to make sure that you are actually demonstrating the value that marketing is bringing to the organization. And not everything has to be around performance marketing and sales. Brand brings huge value to organizations. If you're in comms, being able to, drive cultural change or support with big change programs is value, but really being able to identify your value drivers and then apply a commercial lens to that means that actually you will be taken more seriously at your leadership team at board level. And for me, that's something that I think we all need to really be very purposeful about and take advantage of as and when you've got that data.
So we've covered being purpose-led. We've talked about being relevant, show up before you show off. We've covered off positioning, segmentation, covered a vast amount of things. That's all we've got time for today. I want to thank you for making time. It's been some incredible dialogue going on today, and I look forward to having you back on the series shortly as well and seeing how the ESG business goes. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and really nice to see you again.
Please feel free to carry on the conversation on social and reach out to us if you want to hear more about what the Sustainability Squad is up to. Thank you very much and look forward to seeing you again.
Welcome to the Marketing Society Sustainability Squad podcast, leading the conversation on ESG.